Let's go ahead and get into our conversation today. So I'm going to start by introducing you to our two expert speakers. And first, I have Nikisha Bailey. Nikisha Bailey is a dynamic entrepreneur, entertainment executive, and philanthropist with a deep commitment to community impact. She's the owner of Win-Win Coffee, Philadelphia's first Black woman-led coffee roaster and distributor, recognized by Goldman Sachs at their 10 KSB National Summit and featured on Forbes Next 1000 list. Nikisha's journey in the coffee industry focuses on creating a 100% diaspora-focused supply chain, partnering with marginalized coffee producers to build equity and generational wealth. Before her work in coffee, Nikisha spent over a decade in the music industry as VP head of A&R Admin at Atlantic Records. She's been named a Billboard R&B and hip hop power player and serves as a trustee for the Recording Academy's New York chapter. Nikisha is dedicated to building community and champions the belief that community is everything. Great to have you, Nikisha.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. And next we have Chad Patterson. Chad Patterson is a business executive and strategic visionary with over 15 years of experience in finance, sales, and marketing. Chad has successfully founded 3 ventures and is passionate about helping small business owners and entrepreneurs scale their own ventures. Hey, Chad.
Hello, good afternoon, or if you're in the West Coast, good morning to everyone as well.
Wonderful. All right, so let's jump into it because I got a lot of questions for y'all. So let's get started. I want to kick it off with Chad. So can you tell us what are the key components of a resilience strategy that small business owners should include in their overall business plan?
Yeah, so I think, a resilience strategy is like super important for like any small business or really any business to like survive and thrive in like this rapidly changing environment, right, that we're in. So I think like a solid resilience strategy should probably start with like a risk assessment, right? So like identifying potential threats, market fluctuation, supply chain disruption, like, or even like a product pivot, right? So like by knowing your risks, you can really develop more proactive measures to mitigate like those issues. I think another key component is like adaptability. Like, so how well your business can pivot during like these challenging times. So that could be perhaps like diversifying a revenue stream, right? Rethinking about like operational processes or like building stronger partnerships. Then I also think it's something to consider is like the financial resilience. So like managing debt wisely, right? Like, so maybe personal debt, not necessarily converging that with like business debt, things of that sort. Or if you are going to take on debt, like having like a real clear return on investment, like from a multiplication standpoint. And I think that also leads into like budget allocation. So like even if you're a small business, like it's really important to say, all right, I'm going to allocate a certain amount of capital for marketing or for operations or like for third-party consultants, things of that sort. It gives you like a really clear understanding of like how are you leveraging money. But I think lastly, like really your team's ability to like respond to critical situations, right? And like develop a culture of resilience and like adaptability is like rewarding it, right? Like, so we reward folks who have the ability to do that or like they're being proactive about these type of elements, I think is important in terms of having like a contingency plan and having that in place. So I think when you think about that, right, there's some like frameworks that are important to consider and look at. So like a SWOT analysis, right? That's super important. So that's strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. But I also think like PESTO, right? That's another element is you're looking at like political threats, economic, social, technological, or legal, environmental kind of threats as well. I think those are frameworks that at least position you to look at the market in a very comprehensive way, but like you're really crossing your T's and dotting your I's as well. So that's how I would look at like the resilience standpoint from a strategic element.
Ah, I really like that. And did you say pesto at the end?
Yes. So it's
Oh,
just an acronym.
yeah,
It's just
it like helps you the political, the social. Wow, okay. I really like that. But
I like
also,
that.
yes, yes, it's so good. And that you mentioned it's not just about like doing the work about the financial, but also cultivating that culture of resilience and rewarding that, I think is something that's really important. Okay, Nikisha, you have your business. I'm sure you've seen some things that have required resilience. Can you share a specific experience where you faced a significant challenge in your business and how you navigated through that?
Absolutely. So the first iteration of my business was called Win-Win Coffee Bar, and we were actually a brick and mortar coffee shop and a bar and a restaurant and an event space. And we opened 6 months before the pandemic happened. And so there was a lot of pivoting and resilience that we needed in order to work through the next iteration of what we were going to become. So because we were new entrepreneurs, we thought that we could do everything. So we were like, okay, we have a coffee shop. We have all this coffee equipment. We can get a liquor license. We can have events here. We can bring in our friends who are chefs and serve great food. And we're doing all of these things. And the pandemic happened and all those things had to stop. But we were still new business owners. We still had a staff. We still needed to have income coming in. And so we looked at the business and was like, okay, we can't be a bar. The bar is the most lucrative part. What else can we do to actually continue the business and maybe pivot and, still continue to bring in revenue and get eyes on the business? And that ended up being coffee. And so we didn't know much about the coffee industry exactly, only that we partnered with another local coffee company in order to source our coffee. So we did a joint roast with them where they actually handled sourcing the coffee for us, but we used our marketing prowess and our branding and our social channels and our network to push the coffee. And we ended up being the best-selling coffee for that particular brand for the year. But we saw less of the money because it was a joint venture and they were doing the supply chain work. And so we were like, okay, well, we want to keep all the money that we're bringing in. How can we actually insert ourselves into the supply chain? And that's when we began researching, reaching out to our networks, figuring out how we could get directly or connected directly with coffee producers. I took classes on how to roast coffee, how to import coffee. I started talking to distributors just so I could figure out what the entire supply chain looked like. We found a very large partner in Latin America and we went to visit them and we saw their entire supply chain process, which allowed us to have more visibility of all the different players in the coffee industry and how we could eventually transform into a roaster and an importer. So lots of resilience, working through a whole lot of new things, but ultimately, being able to actually rebrand and repivot ourselves from what we thought our business was going to be, which is a coffee shop and a bar, now into a wholesale, retail, importer, and distributor in brand.
That's amazing just how much you had to change from your original vision, but it sounds like you still kept like the heart of the business, just
Yes.
responding to what was happening, which was a lot.
Yes. And then what was working? People were enjoying the coffee and we were like, okay, if we're able to actually learn about the supply chain, insert ourselves, we can make more money and have more control of our inventory and our product and how we actually do business.
That. So good. Okay. Chad, my next question is for you. How can business owners align their short-term and long-term goals with the need for operational resilience?
Yeah, so I think this all comes down to like clarity of vision, right? Like, so, I think your long-term vision like sets the overall direction of a company, but I think like the short-term goals are like the stepping stones. Like I think of that as like milestones, right? So I think it's important to kind of keep your long-term goals flexible to like accommodate shifts in the market or like other external factors, right? But I also think like when we think about goals, sometimes we provide like an overwhelming element where we're not really thinking about incremental growth because we want like a significant amount of achievements quick. That's why I think like the milestones come in and like the short-term goals are like really important, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. So I think looking at it from that standpoint is really important. When I look at long-term goals, I typically like to focus on like this three, whereas short-term goals, it could be a little more comprehensive. But I think like from a technique standpoint, something to look at is like SMART goals. I think everybody has always heard of that, like the specific, measurable, achievable, like time bound goals. I think that's important because if you put actual time frames on your goals, it gives you something to work towards. And I think that's like the value of goals. It's like you know exactly where you're working towards, you know the destination, and then you know what time you're trying to get there. I think that part is like really important. But I think it's also kind of advantageous to like adjust and accommodate those goals, given like what the market is saying, right? So prime example, what Nikisha was just alluding to, she saw a gap in the market and said, okay, well, people are looking more at the coffee, but then that's great. The customer's looking for that. But then from a profit standpoint, I want to look and generate more revenue for my business. So I'm going to now get into the supply chain element, right? That perhaps wasn't her goal, but like she was able to adjust that actual goal according like to the market. So yeah, I think looking at it from that perspective is important. So there's like goal alignment worksheets and things of that sort. But I do think it's really important, and I'm really keen on like short-term goals are like super important. That gives you like, the spinach to like achieve the long-term goals, right? And I'm always, employing people to look at the short-term goals and trying to like really focus on those and not overwhelm yourself with too much, and let those long-term goals be a little bit more elongated from a time frame standpoint.
That's an excellent point. So giving yourself the flexibility, but using that vision as like your kind of North Star so that you can adjust as the market changes or whatever changes. Okay, Nikisha, what is one major setback you experienced while growing your business, and what lessons did you take away from that?
So as we transitioned into being, a roaster, importer, and distributor, we were moving into a new space. And so we were moving into a brand new development, brand new construction. Obviously, we know there are delays in construction, but we didn't realize how far we would be delayed with the contractor and the developer. And so we began making plans and announcements and locking in these deals, assuming we would have the space by a certain time. And that time happened and the space wasn't complete. And so it actually just got complete in August when it was supposed to be complete by the August prior. So we were a year delayed. So figuring out how we could outsource certain things, so co-packing, co-roasting, and different parts that we were going to own in our new space, being able to bring on partners to help us deliver for the contracts that we had already locked in with retailers and wholesale clients was definitely a big lesson. Just because someone tells you you're going to have your property on this date doesn't mean that you're probably not going to have it on this date, especially if it's new construction.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I bet that is such an elongated period too, from your initial date a whole year later. But finding those other partnerships sounds like it was really valuable and a way for you to, again, pivot or do something different in order to make sure your business could still be up and running.
Yeah, we had to eventually stop saying coming soon and saying coming at some point.
Yeah. Yes, you'll know when I know, that kind of thing. Okay, Chad, what framework or tools do you recommend for assessing and managing risks that could disrupt business operations?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we talked about a little bit earlier is like the SWOT analysis, right? I think that part is like really important. That's simple, like for people to look at. But I think there's like another method. It's ISO. So that's called like International Organization for Standardization, right? Like, so that's more comprehensive frameworks that help like businesses understand their risk landscape and appetite for like a risk too, right? Like smaller businesses, their appetite for risk is probably pretty narrow versus like a big, large enterprise company, a NVIDIA, so to speak. And then I think like a decision tree, right? Like I'm big on those. Like that's something that is important where you can really forecast the potential outcome of a decision, and then like what the favorability of what that decision essentially would look like too, right? Like, so when you look at a decision tree, you say, all right, here's what I want to do. I want to, sell more coffee, right? But then now if I don't sell more coffee, like what does that look like, right? What does that decision ultimately come into? And it's like, all right, well, probably we'll go out of business. Or if I don't sell more coffee, then I need to probably sell my business's parts to another organization, right? Like, so it gives you an idea of like what that risk essentially would look like. And then the appetite as well, like, could I afford that risk, right? So does it even make sense to move in that direction or not? And I think, ultimately, all these are just kind of good elements to try to like protect the business as much as possible. But as I think everybody knows, the market is crazy. Things are always ever changing, right? Like, so these are great kind of perhaps managerial like frameworks, but like ultimately, like you want to be able to be agile and make like really good real-time decisions like as fast as possible, given like any data that you're you're gaining from a customer or from the market. And I think that's like where the biggest success I've seen folks from a business standpoint is like taking that real-time data and like making like a decisive decision, right? And it may be wrong, but like make that decision. If you can validate it, you understand the risk, like just move forward with it, because a lot of times you don't know what's going to happen unless you actually put forth that actual approach, see what the market is saying, and then like, again, iterate from there and like respond from there. And if you look at a lot of companies, a lot of these companies started off like certain product offerings or certain sectors and then gradually evolved to something totally different, right? And that's because it's all about like, yeah, they understood risks and things of that sort and their appetite, but they were able to iterate, right, continuously. And I think that part is like really important to consider when you're looking at these different frameworks.
That makes a lot of sense. So like acting quickly, so you can respond to the quick changes in the market. Okay. Steve, Nikisha, how have you had to pivot your business model or your strategy? And what prompted that decision? And how did you implement the change?
Yeah, so pivoting to having our own coffee brand and provide the services, that definitely took a pivot from the business model. Instead of just having people come up and pay directly for the coffee, we were now like going after retailers, and wholesale buyers is really where the main profit margin is. So spending some time having somebody on for biz development. So going out to all like these a mix of the large players, the small players, and the medium-sized players, knowing that we needed to find consistent wholesale accounts. We also added in this mobile coffee option, which I was just peeking in the questions and someone asked about pivoting. If you're a service-based business and you're able to bring that service to a person, that allows you to be able to charge more, one, because it's convenient for you. So being able to think of different streams of revenue for your business. You might be service business, but can you take that service to someone else? I have coffee, but can I create a mobile coffee experience that's different for somebody else and charge a higher premium because I'm bringing the coffee shop to you, your business, your university, your school? And so thinking through all these different models, and I might just sell one thing, I sell coffee, but how many different iterations can I get you a coffee experience, whether it's retail, wholesale, me just setting up coffee for catering, or me creating an actual mobile experience and having all this different coffee equipment for you to come in and print selfies and do fancy cold brews. So just thinking of the different ways that the one thing you can do, the different ways you can do it to bring in different revenue streams.
I really like that. So like, what are all the coffee experiences? What are all the ways people can experience your business? That's really cool. Okay, Chad, what practical exercises or trainings can you suggest to help business owners cultivate an adaptable mindset with their teams, especially?
Yeah, I think that the optimal word in this is team, right? Like, so, when you're cultivating adaptability within your team, I mean, obviously that's really important. I think like starting with like scenario planning, right? Like, hey, we have a couple of scenarios, like what would this look like? This kind of ties back into the decision tree, right? That kind of is the subset, scenario planning. But I think this really stimulates various like crises or changes in the business landscape, and that you could work through as a team, right? Like I think team is really important. And Steve Jobs said this, and I thought it was really like valuable. It's like you hire smart people, like not to tell them what to do, for them to tell you what to do, right? And I think like collectively as a team, solving problems together is super important. One, you give each other agency into like being an actual value individual contributor to a larger issue, but like other people have perspectives and experiences and things of that sort that like you want that brought to the table and to the forefront. So I think more than anything is like not you being a leader and solving all the problems on your own. I think it's more important to say, let's bring and cultivate a team approach, and like we collectively solve a problem as a group. And I think that part is important. I think also kind of what I alluded to a little while ago is like another useful exercise is like fail fast experiment, right? So that's where you take like small projects or like innovations, right? Or you test them quickly. And like the team learns from like any setbacks or like, any actual long-term impact that was derived from that experience. But I think this really encourages cross functional collaboration, right? And it breaks like the silos. And I think that part is really important. I think that improves the adaptability and exposes team members to different roles and perspectives, because I think that's how they grow individually as well. So I'm a big proponent of like team collaboration. I think, you approach any situation like that, I think there's typically going to be a more fruitful outcome in return.
I love that it's about the collaboration and doing the experiments, the fail fast experiments. That's really interesting too, kind of like you said, expose yourself to that. Okay, Nikisha, how do you manage your time effectively while juggling the demands of a growing business? Any tips from your own journey?
Yeah. So one thing that I realize is that I have to have time to myself at some point of the day. So if that means me adjusting my sleep schedule, my habits, I have to do that. So that whether I get that time is 5:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. or it's 2 to 3, just having an hour of time that's just for me. I can just sit and have a coffee, read a book, or do nothing. But that hour is my hour. Just because, as a scaling business, you're going so hard throughout the rest of the day, but tailoring your personal life to make sure that you're able to make time for yourself. And also, like, if you have a thing that's your thing, like getting my hair done is my thing, I'm always going to find time to do that for myself. Even if I don't do anything else, I'm always going to do my hair. So making sure that you're also just taking care of yourself, which sounds like it's easy, but like when you're in the midst of growing and scaling a business, you're often the last thing that you think about. So remembering to do that, and also having some type of admin or virtual support. Finding the budget to have somebody who can schedule meetings for you, who can do smaller tasks and tee up the bigger tasks for you, can take a lot off your plate. When you're growing, you're having all these meetings, you have all these things to do, having that support can be really pivotal in you getting to that next level because you're not bogged down with so many little tasks. So I highly recommend carving out a little budget. If you can have a virtual assistant, it'll transform how you're able to operate as a leader.
Really like that, like prioritizing yourself even when it's so hard because your business is growing. Chad, can you walk us through the process of developing a comprehensive contingency plan? What should business owners be prioritizing in this plan?
Yeah, I think when you look at a contingency plan, you really want to identify like critical operational elements, right? Like, so when I say that, I'm going to be more specific. I think these are ones that keep your business running like day to day afloat, right? So I think that part is important. After that, I think just consider like what risks could impact those particular operations, like i.e. loss of talent, right? Or funding issues, right? So I think prioritizing like these risks based on both like their likelihood and potential kind of impact of the business really allows you to shape that contingency plan. I think next is really developing like response strategies for each scenario. Like, so for example, how would you communicate with your team during like a technological outage, right? Or like, what's the plan if your main supplier, goes under, right? So I think ensuring that your team is familiar like with the plan through like a regular drill. Like I like to think of that as, when you work at like a big organization in a like a facility, like they usually have like fire drills and like, every 3 months you gotta like go out and do that collectively as a group. But I think like that's the mind frame, right? It's like, all right, we know if this happens, like what we're gonna do. And I think like when you look at why people are usually are like scared of something or nervous is like they're forecasting the outcome because they don't know like what they're going to do. But typically people who are less and more poised in their behavior and demeanor is like, at the end of the day, I pretty much know if we're going to go in direction A, I know what we need to do if it doesn't go in the right direction, right? So then I'm less worried and the anxiety is less on me because I already have some sort of forecasting understanding of like where I'm going to go. So think about contingency plans like that. Again, Mike Tyson always said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. So that's the market, right? So the contingency plans could be great, but until that happens, like you don't necessarily know. But I do think it's really thinking about like the critical elements in your operation day to day and like how valuable they are, and then kind of putting the right infrastructure and systems in place, given, if those do come to fruition, like this is what you essentially need to do. But I think even more so, here's why I think it's even more important. Like I'm a big proponent of entrepreneurs like working less in the business and like working more on the business. And like in order for you to like sell your company, like these type of things need to be embedded into the infrastructure where someone else can come in and immediately start to kind of like activate themselves. So like these are the assets that you sell to like a next business owner, where it's like you don't necessarily need to even know too much about the industry or the business, I already have it operationally set up for you where like you can now just run it, right? Like, so think about that part too. Don't think about like, yeah, this is tedious, but like think about, okay, in order for me to create this generational wealth, I need to like think about the future. And if I'm acquiring a business, what would I need and want to like purchase and like start to build and reverse engineer that way? I think that's something also to consider.
Oh, wow, that is like the big picture, right? Like when I can bring someone in. And I love that too, because it almost like motivates you. I don't know. I think sometimes you need to find like those motivations, especially when you said sometimes it is tedious. So that can help. Nikisha, okay, what practices have you implemented in your business operations that have strengthened your resilience over time?
So any type of SOPs or operational procedures, making sure they're written down. When we onboard new people, making sure they have a copy of it and we go through it with them. Also anything, depending on the team, for example, our design team, making sure if we bring on a design person, they have all the brand parameters, they have all the login information that they need, and making sure that we're setting up the team for the success at the role that they need to do. And this could even be for people who are actual employees or contractors, just making sure they have all the information up front so they can best execute on their job. So that means keeping records of everything. If we're implementing new policies, what those are, a list of all our vendor accounts, all the contact information they need, and, doing regular checkups with them to make sure that they feel like they're still set up for success at 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, and a year.
Oh, that like documenting everything. Ooh, that's a big one, and getting those SOPs into place. So someone can really just pop in and like step one, step two, like I can do
everything. An employee handbook too is key.
Yes, employee handbook. I feel like we're going to get some questions about the employee handbook. And on questions, if you guys are having questions, please just drop them in the chat. We will find them so that way we can ask them live to our speakers when we get to our Q&A. Okay, wonderful. Okay, Chad, how important is internal and external communication in times of disruption? And what best practices can you share for maintaining clarity?
Yeah, I think internal and external communication is super important. I think more important than that is like internal, right? Like that is the foundation of culture, more important than anything else. And if you don't create an environment where people feel like they can communicate, whether good, bad, or indifferent, I think you're just setting the business up for failure. Again, like, so Jeff Bezos, I was watching something on him. All right, side note real quick. An important thing to do if you are a founder, like carve out 10 minutes a day, if you have it, and like go and review like big time CEOs and like leaders and just listen to like what they say. I think you're going to get a really great perspective that you can always incorporate into your business. Something just to consider. All right, I'm back on what we're going to talk about. So I think, communication during disruption, it's like anything. It's like a relationship, right? Like sometimes like my wife doesn't know if I'm upset about something, but like if I don't communicate that, she can't be a mind reader, and then I can't be upset that she's not tending to like my concerns, right? Same mindset, same idea, right? Like during chaos, like you need calm. So I think in turn, like it's essential to maintain like clarity and transparency, like with your team. So use like regular updates, kind of like what Nikisha was saying, in terms of like your SOPs or things of that sort. But do that whether it's email or like team meetings or like project management tools. Like I think just ensuring like everyone is aligned and like everyone's voice is actually heard, right? I think that is important, is making sure everyone feels like they can have some agency in sharing their feedback. I think as a leader, which is something that I've found really successful, like if I'm talking with my team in terms of like internal communication, I always go last, right? Because I don't want my opinion or perspective to persuade someone else's thought-provoking like suggestion, and I don't want to discourage them. So I let them all go, and then I kind of provide feedback at the end. So I think when you're thinking about like these types of comms, and as a leader, like there's also like a psychological element that you have to be mindful of too, right? And I think the other part I'll also say is like lean on your stakeholders too, right? So that's investors, that's advisors, things of that sort. Like they're there to be a sounding board, and you don't have to solve all these problems like by yourself, right? So I do think it comes a time when you want to lean in on your team or leaning on like external support members to figure out like what could be better or what ways that you can improve that kind of communication channel. And I think it just, again, helps to create like a really healthy environment. As I alluded to before, like that creates a more collaborative team approach when you're dealing with like these issues and whatnot. And I think that provides a sense of calm and understanding in terms of what direction you're going to.
Absolutely. I really like the focus on like preparing people and taking away all this anxiety around the unknown. Okay, Nikisha, how has building a support network helped you in tough times? And can you share an example of how collaboration with others made a difference?
Yes. So this should work in most markets, but I live in Philadelphia. I consider Philadelphia like a baby New York. It's still a big city. There's a lot of entrepreneurs here, and I make sure to know who these up or scaling and growing companies are. So I know the person that is the pickle company, the beer company, the tea company, just to have a network of people who I know are going through the same thing I'm growing as someone who started a business fresh and then was able to scale and grow and being able to make a call to them if I see something that I'm not, familiar with, or I have a question about how did you get this distributor, or how did you get your product here, or how did you get this client, or who's your realtor? Being able to have a bank of other businesses in your area who are dealing with the same issues, dealing with the same mandates from government, dealing with the same, rules from licenses and inspections, who also have a Rolodex of people in their network and are able to extend that to you, I think is key. I've also done some accelerator programs that are local to Philadelphia. So Goldman Sachs was one of them. And I make sure that we're members of our chambers of commerce. That's another way to have a great network and to actually be connected, to higher officials who can help you get meetings and larger clients. I also attend city council meetings, like being able to have influence and talk to your city council person as we were going, under construction, and we needed to know exactly, the parameters that we needed to get our business license, our construction license, all those things. Having, your city council person being able to know who you are in your business can sometimes make things a little bit easier to work through the system. And so it's really it's like you have a business, you're also out there on campaign. So you're telling everyone in the city, everyone around you, this is what I am and this is what I'm doing, because you never know when someone who might not seem to be in a position of power has an opportunity to help you within their network.
Oh, I love the campaigning. Like you're out there, boots on the ground, like doing all of those different things. And I wouldn't have even thought about, going to your local city council meetings and things like that, just really making sure that you're a part of the decisions being made.
Yes. Our city council person was able to help us as we were going through getting our licenses for the construction too. So they were able to help. This is exactly where you need to go, because if you're doing new construction, you're like, I'm not really sure what to do. I've never built out a coffee warehouse before, but they're like, this is a person that's going to do this part. Then it goes to this part and to this part. So city council, if you have time, check it out. They usually meet on a weekly basis. Pull up on a meeting once a month.
Yes, I love that. All the city councils from the people in the chat are going to be getting flooded in the next couple of weeks. All right. So our final question before we move into audience Q&A. I want to start with Chad and then go to Nikisha. So if you could give one piece of advice to the business owners in the audience about how to build resilience in their business, what would you say? Chad.
Yeah, I mean, Nikisha, you're dropping gems right now. So this is some stuff that I need to actually take some time and think about too. I think my biggest thing would be community, right? Like that's what Nikisha was just alluding to, right? Is like, again, you don't have to put it all on yourself. I think as entrepreneurs, like we do things in silos all the time. I've fell victim to this so many different times, right? But I do think like cultivating that community around you is just like, it's almost infiltrating or insulating you, pardon me, with like the right protection, right? So I definitely think finding that tribe, like I literally said this the other day, I think it's super important to like build that community. Like even if it's small, even if it's a few people, like as an entrepreneur, I have a lot of friends who are like working for companies, And I have a hard time even sharing information with them because they just do not traverse the same path and landscape that I do. Right. Like, so it's like me trying to find other people who are like-minded or who are in that entrepreneurial journey, that I can like communicate and go back and forth with and share best practices or like just kind of vent to, hey, like this is frustrating. I think like finding that community is important because like they're the ones who give you the, you know, the motivation when things are hard, right? They're the ones who remind you, hey, you remember why you started, right? Like, hey, you know, you are having an impact in the community and you are doing these type of things and like, we need you. Like, you need that type of group and that community to like replenish and to recalibrate you at times because as an entrepreneur, like if everybody could do it, like everybody would do it, right? It's you know, no disrespect, but like my friends, they work at these big companies. Like, yeah, that's great, but you don't really have to work that hard. Like, you have everything funneled to you, right? You have all these resources at your disposal. But then I also realize, like, that also makes them really lazy at times, right? So they're not sharp, they're not acute on things where, like, I can pick up something instantaneously because, like, I'm always, as Nikisha said, I'm always campaigning. I'm always on that type of like approach, right? On offense versus defense. So I definitely think like lean into a community, like build that community, even if it's 3 people, even if it's 5 people, like find your tribe, cultivate your tribe, like pour into your tribe. And I think it will be reciprocated back to you.
So powerful. I love that. And Nikisha, same question. One piece of advice to the folks in the audience about how to build resilience. What would you say?
I would say not only in your business life, but your personal life. If there's something you have to do and it's kind of making you like scared or you're a little aloof, do it scared. I think that's how you learn resiliency. You'll either work through it or you'll fail and you'll learn from your findings. But if you have to do something and it's giving you that pit in your stomach type feeling, that means that you probably need to do it and explore it. I'm going to give 2, just leaning in on what Chad said about the network as well. Lean in on your network. Like if you have close friends and family and people around you who could potentially help you grow and scale, you never know. Like I think the thing with social media is you don't know when people are watching you and they can see your journey, they can see your story, they can see you growing and scaling. I'm now having personal friends calling me and asking me if I'm looking for investors because they want to invest in Win Win Coffee. So don't be afraid to go to your network and ask them for help, ask them for resources, especially if they're tuned into your journey and they've been there to see you from the beginning to where you are in your scaling position.
I love that. I love that. That is so powerful and also shows how many people might be rooting for you and waiting, to support you. Because I think sometimes it's hard to see that.
I think it's hard when you're just posting, you're working, you're like, okay, well, I'm just doing all this for myself, but people are actually watching.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay, so we've got some really good questions from the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into those. But please, if you're in the audience and you have more questions, we're going to fit in as many as we can. So first question is, I think I'll start it with Chad. So how do we determine when we need to modify a goal itself or if we need to modify the approach to the goal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like when you're looking at a goal and obviously you want to understand like the impact of that actual goal, like from a measurable standpoint. But I think you want to also consider like the input that you're putting in, right? Like, so if you're putting in a substantial amount of input and like, yeah, this goal is pretty challenging at this time, I think it's okay to adjust it to something that's more manageable, that's like more obtainable too. And I think the biggest thing is trust your instincts. Like, I'm such a big proponent of, I'm very conscious of this. So I know like religion shouldn't be into things, but like, you know, a vision is put into you. There's a reason why a vision is put into you, right? And you have the ability. You may not see that you have the ability, but like you have the ability, right? And I think using your own intuition and your own kind of discernment on like things needed to be adjusted, like lean into that. Like there's really no right, in my opinion, there's really no right or wrong like approach. The only way you know is if you actually do it. So I think, you being a leader, just figuring that out is based on your intuition, but I think it's also based on the market, right? If the market is telling you to shift, it's kind of like what Nikisha was alluding to. Like if there's something pushing you towards that, like lean into it, listen to it, and then adjust. And like the more you iterate, I think the better you just learn about yourself as a leader, but you just learn about like different opportunities and what works and what doesn't, right? And so I would say probably look at it from that end.
A lot of sense. And Nikisha, same question or anything to add about determining whether you need to modify a goal or the approach to the goal?
I think as you're growing and scaling, making sure you have metrics to things that you're doing, and like, are you losing money? What are the desirable outcomes that you want from whatever it is you're doing? So with me, it was having my own coffee brand, the mobile coffee, retail and wholesale coffee. I see that I make much more money with wholesale accounts than I do at retail. And retail is a much longer game because you have to meet with so many different people. And so having a real focus this beginning of the year and getting more wholesale accounts. And that's going to other cafes and restaurants and just getting them to buy our coffee wholesale. And so we saw that that was working and that was generating more money than retail. And we began focusing more on that because that was the higher return. And also in tandem, once retailers know that these different cafes and companies are carrying their coffee, that's more alluring for them to take a meeting with you. So looking at what works, what's actually bringing you revenue and what's not costing you money or what might feel like wasted time, and focusing your efforts onto what's actually scaling your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay, our next question is about the decision tree. So Chad, how do you start a decision tree with one goal and branch out on how to make it happen?
Yeah, so when you look at decision trees, like a multitude of decisions, right?
Mhm.
So it's not like just subjected to one, right? So I think when you're looking at the overall goal, you can say, all right, well, my goal is to create a coffee, you're like shop, right? It's like, all right, so I could either one, start as a manufacturer and like be the supply chain kind of intermediary, or I can launch my own actual company, or I can try to acquire a company, right, that's already existing, and then I grow that, right? Like, so then the goal is to have your own coffee company, but like now you have three decisions to like model out, and like the decision tree helps you identify which one makes the most sense, right? Like so when you think about the decision tree, look at it from that standpoint. It's like you have the tree, and then the branches are essentially the elements that kind of give you something to think about, like what direction you will essentially go in. So hopefully that helps. Did I answer your question too?
Wonderful. Okay, so Nikisha, next question is for you. This person is currently in the Goldman Sachs 1 million Black women cohort. So that's really exciting. And their question is about creating SOPs because that process can be overwhelming. Where is a good place to start, or are there steps someone can take to start creating those?
So I come from an operations background and working in the music industry. So one thing that I learned from being a leader was that if I can write out the process for you, that means you're going to ask me less questions and give me more of my time back. So that's kind of how I lead operations, is that like by me being able to standardize things and have them written out, that's ultimately giving me more time back because I don't have to explain things to you. A really good book that I read is called The Art of Thinking Clearly. And it's about checklists and having those in place. And you can turn your checklists into operating procedures. So if you think about it, planes, let me knock on some wood, don't crash because pilots have these checklists that they have to do every time before they, depart from an airport. And so starting with the checklist and being able to map out all the processes for different avenues of your business and turning those into operating procedures, I think is a great start, because if you just think that you have to write out all this information, that might seem like a lot. But if you start with a checklist and expand upon that, that could be a lower lift in the beginning.
Oh, okay, perfect. And Emma is dropping when we get gems from everyone. She's dropping those in the chat. So, okay, Chad, this next question is for you. It says, you are preaching. I'm often operating solo because the groups I have tried to connect with, they just haven't connected as my tribe. People that make sense to connect with seem too busy, and I am also busy. do I just keep looking, or how do I find my tribe when I've been in business for 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before I get in there, I mean, just share something. So there's this book. I think I need to blur this out so you can actually see. But this is really good. This is kind of what Nikisha is kind of alluded to. So it's called "What the Heck is EOS?" So it's like Entrepreneurial Operating System. Solid book, right? I recommend this. Gina Wickman is like a really intelligent individual, but it really talks about systematizing things, like from an entrepreneurial standpoint. So if you like reading, you care about that, or you like to listen to it on audio, I think that's something to look at. And it talks about kind of processes. All right, so back to the question. I think I would look at it from a perspective of, right, like you've been trying to find your tribe. I think the definition of sanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results, right? So I think part of that is like, all right, I'm a big proponent on influence versus concern, right? Like, so you have the ability to influence that. I would say, like, start to cultivate your own community yourself. I would assume 9 times out of 10, there's other people that feel the exact same way that you do. So, like, put yourself out there and say, hey, I've been dealing with this. I'm looking to find a tribe, whether it's on LinkedIn or Instagram or things of that sort. Like, let people know, like, this is what you're going through and what you're dealing with and, like, what you're trying to create. I think you'll be surprised on other folks who are probably like, I'm dealing with the same thing. Like, let's talk, right? And I think 1 turns to 2, 2 turns to 4, right? But I think start with just, hey, I just want to find one person. I think a great way of doing that, like from a solution oriented, is like advisors. Find an advisor. That part is extremely important. Someone who is going to be unbiased, that can tell you you're stinky, right? Or is going to tell you you're doing something really well, right? So I definitely would say, like, start with like having like advisors, maybe some that are in a similar industry or adjacent industry too, but like have them in place. I think then they can start recommending other individuals who they come across, right, who may be like-minded and fit into the same kind of bucket that you're doing. So I would definitely look at like, all right, let me try something different. Hopefully those are just like some solutions that could be advantageous, but I would definitely like put yourself out there. Let people know that you're looking for this and trying to get this. I think you'll be surprised on the feedback or response that you'll get, that other folks are looking for the same thing.
Of that. Okay, so this next question is for Nikisha. Where did you turn for advice on how to leverage your initial major financial decisions?
So it was actually just myself and my business partner. So we had friends that worked in finance who, before we were able to actually bring on a CFO who were able to advise us, but also just, making the decisions ourselves, which some of them worked and some of them didn't, but the ones that didn't, learning from those mistakes. So we were self-funded for the initial launch of our company. And so we knew that there were certain things that we needed. And I also had experience from working in my prior career in managing budgets. And so I oversaw that process and brought in the skill set I had for that. And when we were able to bring on somebody that could actually help us with the financials and the projections and knowing, being able to do like a P&L report, a balance sheet, but knowing that we had to manage that ourselves and have, we use QuickBooks, having that in place as a placeholder until we were actually able to bring on a specialist. So sometimes you just got to do it all, I think, if you can, and then know that you do need to have somebody, if that's not your area of expertise, knowing that you're working toward bringing on someone who can support you in that capacity.
Yes, and I want to do a shameless plug right now, because I think at the beginning we mentioned Chad is one of our AOF business coaches. And so if you're at a space where you're looking for an advisor, or as Nikisha said, someone who's like an expert in an area, you need an outside perspective, we have free business coaching that you can go in, and it's tailored to whatever specific topic is on your mind. So if it's capital, if it's legal, if it's growth, like, we'll drop that link in the chat and you can go and sign up for one of those. Okay, our next question is for Chad. How do you navigate your gut and passion telling you that the direction you have taken is the right one, without neglecting the fact that the market is leaning for you to go a different direction? And like, how long do you wait to see if your gut was right all along?
Yeah, I think I would always trust my gut, right? So I think I'll start there. I think secondly, a great approach for this particular question is like A/B testing, right? So you say, I'm gonna go one with my gut, we're gonna do this for a certain amount of time. This is the outcome that I want to have. And then B, I'm gonna go with the market for this duration of time. Like this is the outcome. I think you test both simultaneously. Then you get the feedback, real time data on, okay, well, the one approach that I felt, really strong and conviction in my gut, we went in this direction. This was the outcome. This was a success. These were the challenges. Same thing for like the market, but at least you don't have to invest too much too early in either one. You kind of give yourself some ability to be agile and agnostic, but you are being calculated about each individual approach and you are giving it the right resources and time to like see it succeed. But I think it's a way where you can test both without necessarily kind of discouraging one versus the other.
Awesome. Let's see. Next question. It's for both of y'all. So we'll kick it off with Nikisha. What are the best social media tactics for pulling your business out of a stale state?
Being consistent, just posting. I think we like you might have post something and you don't get any type of engagement. That doesn't mean you should stop posting. It means maybe you should look at that post and see maybe why it didn't resonate. But having some sort of framework, around how many times a day you're going to post, which of your outlets are the best, which ones, gravitate toward what type of posts, and then having an outline and the structure of the type of post that you're going to do. So for us, which I still am involved in social media. We do have a person that just helps me pull content. So that takes something off my plate, just pull the content we did from the past week or the past few weeks. Send me a high quality photo of a coffee or of the product. Send me a photo of someone in the business actually at an event or an activation. And then you could send me, I think the other one is, we've started doing influencer posts. So any of the influencer content that we use micro influencers, and we use influencers that already follow the brand. And so one thing that we started doing was going through all our followers, seeing who was commenting and seeing who was doing their own personal coffee content, reaching out and saying, hey, you want some coffee? Can you create content? Let's do it. And then, that's going to be a third bucket of the posts that we just do every week. And we execute on those three because we know they work. We know they work. So starting off with a basic plan of just to post 2 or 3 times a week. I can do a post about my service or my product and a post of myself as an entrepreneur, but being consistent with it. That's the key.
I like that. Don't be discouraged, like keep going, because the consistency is there. Okay, Chad, same question. What are the best social media tactics for pulling your business out of a stale state?
Yeah, so one thing I'm not going to do is talk about stuff that I'm not an expert on, right? So I'll probably push that to Nikisha more than anything else. But I think before I even go in that direction, I think like be mindful, like, is that social media channel like the right channel for you, right? Like I have a consulting firm. Instagram is not the channel for me, right? That is not the channel. I'm competing against a lot of what's going on Instagram, okay? My channel that's more effective is LinkedIn, right? And so I think like also being mindful of like, you don't have to do everything what like everybody else is doing. So Instagram or Facebook or maybe, X, that may not be like where your audience is. I would go where my audience is, right? And like who I'm looking to essentially serve. And then like having a deeper dive on like focusing on that particular channel that I think would be most fruitful. But again, that's not my expertise. I'm probably not the best on social media. I would probably push that back to Nikisha. Maybe she can answer that a little bit better than I can.
I think you bring up a great point, though, of knowing which one serves you best. And also, if you want to use all 3 of them, what type of messaging or what type of content works best on all 3? So we have a pretty good IG following, but we also have a decent LinkedIn following. And what we post on IG varies from the LinkedIn content that we do. That's more business related, supply chain related, related to the overall coffee industry, where our Instagram is much different. You're going to learn more about our products and even, my entrepreneurial journey and my business partners. So just tailoring your content to whatever platform you do decide to use. It's not like a cookie cutter situation. Posting the same thing on every platform isn't going to get you the optimal results, but tailoring to each will.
Love it. That is wonderful. And we have in the chat, Chad and Nikisha have graciously shared their LinkedIn profiles. And then also we have Win-Win Coffee's IG. So if you guys want to check those out, you can find them right here. And we're already at the top of the hour. So thank you all. Thank you so much, Chad and Nikisha, for being so open, not only with your advice, but your own personal business journeys. Thank you to the audience for taking time out of your very busy day to come and attend this webinar and really be engaged in the chat. We really hope that each of you feel like you have something that will help you build that resilience in your business for many, many years to come. All right, that's it for today. We will see you all at the next one. Bye, everyone.